and welcome back to my channel. My name is Trisha and today on The Aspiring Home Cook, I'm going to share with you a much awaited recipe. I'm so excited. A few years ago, I put up my marzipan recipe and that was so well received. It's one of my most popular videos to date. A lot of you have made that recipe, sent me pictures, tagged me in your social media, and it fills my heart with so much joy that you managed to achieve success from that recipe. A lot of you have also come back asking me for an eggless version of that recipe, and after a little bit of tweaking and trial and error, I'm happy to announce that I've nailed the vegan version of this recipe. So today I'm going to share with you my eggless marzipan recipe. No egg, no dairy, but it is equally delicious. So for all of you who've been so patient and waited eagerly for this recipe, this one's for you. So without any further delay, let's head on over to the recipe. I will leave a link to the complete written recipe in the description box for you to follow. So guys, for today's recipe, here's what we're going to use. I've got 125 grams of cashew nuts or cashew seeds as they're commonly referred to. Now these are raw, not roasted. You can either use the whole or even the broken pieces that you get. Those work well too. I've got 200 grams of sugar. This is plain regular grain sugar. I'm going to use some almond essence. And to color my marzipan, I've got some food color. Now I get a lot of questions on the kind of color that I use. I'm going to be using some Americolor gel food color. The colors you pick are totally up to you. I probably will work with this color palette that you see here. A soft pink, an avocado green, and I believe this one's a peach. What do you do if you don't have access to gel food colors? You can definitely use liquid food colors as well. However, go easy on the amount of liquid food coloring that you use, because that will add a little more moisture to the marzipan and change the consistency of it. The beauty about gel food colors, if you can get your hands on some, is that you need only a very tiny bit of color to provide a nice beautiful color through the marzipan, and it doesn't quite change the consistency of the marzipan like a liquid food color will do. That's the only difference. So those are our ingredients. Let's talk equipment that you're going to need. You're going to need a vessel to cook your marzipan off and a large spoon. I'm using a wooden spoon. I get questions whether you have to use a wooden spoon or whether you can use a silicone spatula instead. If you have one that's big enough, you can definitely use one. I've always made Christmas sweets like guava cheese, marzipan and milk cream using a wooden spoon, and that's what I'm continuing to do. Now, I know in the past videos, and I know after watching this video, you're going to have heaps of questions about this pan. This is an old KitchenAid pan. It's about 7 years old now. KitchenAid no longer makes this particular design, but all you need is a thick vessel, a heavy bottomed pan, and while sweets like marzipan are infamous for taking hours of cooking time, using a pan that is wide is going to help reduce that cooking time by increasing the surface area. So try and look for a pan that is slightly on the wider side than a regular vessel that you would use to cook a curry, for example. If you don't have access to a wide pan, you can use any vessel, any sized vessel that you have. Just make sure it's a thick, heavy bottomed one. Now, apart from this, you don't really need much else. How you decide to shape your marzipan will decide whether you need molds or not. If you're just going to do some free-form shapes like shaping them into marzipan fruits, then you don't need molds. If not, you will need molds of some description. Now these molds I got when I was in Mumbai a few years ago. Most of you will recognize something like this. These used to be rubber molds ages and ages ago, but I see that they've now made silicone molds with the same design. Silicone molds are a little easier to maintain and care for. The rubber molds sometimes tend to break if exposed to really hot weather conditions and so on. So that's what I'm going to use. If you can't get these molds, that's fine as well. Any other silicone molds that are available will work just as well. Alright, so now with that done, let's go ahead and start off with the recipe. The first thing that I'm going to do is soak these cashew nuts. This is just regular water at room temperature. I'm just going to make sure that these cashew nuts are submerged. If you see any bits of skin, those will easily come off when the cashew nuts have had a little time to soak, you can get rid of that because that will otherwise come through in your finished marzipan, and you really don't want those little specks coming through. Alright, so I'm just going to leave this to stand for about 10 minutes now before I can proceed with the recipe. The cashew nuts have now been soaking for about 10 minutes. I'm going to drain this water, run them under some fresh water and drain that out as well, and I'll be back. And now I'm just going to pop all of these nuts into the jar of my blender along with 1/4 cup of water. This water is just plain water at room temperature, and I'm going to grind this down to a nice fine paste. So after a bit of grinding, this is what I've ended up with. A fairly thick, chunky paste, but I want this to be a little on the thinner side so that I get a nice smooth finish to my marzipan. Now, if you feel that your mixer, your grinder is having a little trouble, feel free to add a little more water. I'm going to go in with maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons more of water just to help me get that nice consistency. Remember, don't add too much water at this stage because you're just going to have to cook it for that much longer to help that water evaporate. So this is about another 1/8 of a cup. And we're just going to blitz this once again till it forms a nice paste. And very soon you'll be left with a nice paste that looks like this. So just to show you the consistency, it's a nice smooth paste. There are a few really tiny grains of the cashew nut that I can still feel, but that's fine. They shouldn't cause too much of a problem, but if you feel that there are still really big pieces left in there, you might want to grind it for a little bit longer. Take off all that cashew paste into the pan that you're going to use to cook the marzipan. Once you've got all of that cashew paste in there, tip in all the sugar, and you're just going to give this a little bit of a mix, and we're ready to take it to the stove top and start cooking. Let's head on over to the stove top. With your vessel on a medium-low heat, you're going to start stirring, making sure that that sugar dissolves. And you'll see that as soon as the heat is turned on, once that sugar starts dissolving, this turns into a slightly looser texture or a slightly looser consistency. That just means that the sugar is dissolving in the mix. It is about 3:13 in the afternoon right now. With a larger pan, this is going to actually come together much sooner than you realize. So make sure that you don't leave the pan unattended. You have to keep stirring constantly. And if and when you see little specks like this, carefully using a little spoon, or since I've just put it on, I know it's not too hot, pick them out and get rid of them. Make sure that you scrape down the marzipan that's on the edges as well, otherwise those will just harden over there. And you're going to continue this cooking process until this mixture thickens and starts coming away from the pan. Something that I forgot to do at the start was add the almond essence, but I'm going to do that right now. So into this goes about 1/2 teaspoon of almond essence, and you're going to stir that in and continue the cooking process. So it's about 3:19 at the moment. So that's about 5 minutes of cooking, and like you can see, this mix has thickened a fair bit compared to when we first started. It's nowhere near ready at the moment, but I know that I'm pretty much well on my way with the cooking process. If you feel that the pan's getting too hot, feel free to lower the heat a little more and continue cooking. It is 3:23 at the moment, so 10 minutes from the time we first started, and you can see before your very eyes how that consistency has changed. I'm actually at this 10-minute mark going to test for doneness. How do you know if your marzipan is done? A lot of times I have viewers asking me how to tell whether the marzipan is done, or then coming back and telling me that it was too sticky or too dry. Here's how you tell. I do the cold water test. This is just a bowl with a little ice cold water. So this water is really cold, and that's important. Just water at room temperature will not do the trick. Okay, into this bowl, I'm just going to pop in a little bit of that marzipan mix. Keep stirring that mix at the bottom. And just for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to take this pan off the heat. I don't want this to burn. If you can get someone to help you at this point, it's a good idea because you need to keep stirring that mix that's in the pan. Give the marzipan a few seconds to cool down, and then you're going to try and roll that into a ball. You need the water there to be cold so that it cools down this marzipan really well. Now with the wet hand, you're not really going to be able to tell how sticky this is. So take that ball of marzipan into the other hand and feel around. Now I can see that it is forming a nice ball, but it's still on the softer side. So I know that this marzipan is not completely done. It probably needs another 30 seconds to a minute. That's it. Yes, within 12 minutes of cooking, I've got a batch that's almost ready. Now remember, these timings that I'm mentioning depend on a number of factors. The heat, the source of heat that you're using, how hot, how cold that gets, how hot or cold the temperature where you live is, and the size of the pan, the thickness of the pan, the width of the pan. All these little things, little factors decide how long that sweet is going to take to cook. So I'm going to pop this aside and we're going to get the marzipan back on for maybe another 30 seconds to a minute. Remember, all this while you're cooking it on a medium-low heat. Now this doesn't look like a lot at this point, but this recipe will yield 1/4 kilo or 250 grams thereabouts of marzipan. It's been about another minute or so. I'm going to do another test to check and see. Let's pull this off the heat. Give the marzipan a few seconds in there to cool off, and that's what I'm left with. I know that this marzipan will now hold shape really well. It feels a lot better to the touch. Once you make a few batches of this, you know exactly what you're looking for. But it's not tacky anymore. Ignore the wet hands, dry your hands off, and you'll be able to tell exactly whether your marzipan's ready to be taken off the heat. So I'm just going to turn that heat off and take that marzipan out onto a plate. We're done with the cooking process. And at this stage, we're very carefully going to take that marzipan out onto our plate. Remember, this is going to thicken and continue hardening a little bit as it cools down. And I'm just going to spread that out just a little bit. We're going to leave this aside to cool now. I'm looking for this to be still a little warm to continue with the rest of the process, but right now this is too hot to touch, so I am going to leave this for a little while, just till it's cool enough to handle. I mean, can you believe that you've got marzipan cooked in about 10 to 12 minutes tops? That, I'd say, is quite an achievement, and if you've made marzipan in the past, you know how these things take ages to cook. It's been a few minutes since I've taken the marzipan onto the plate. I'm just going to move things around to make sure that this cools down a little bit faster. And like you can see, it has started to thicken up really nicely. Okay, that should be good. I'm just going to leave this for a little while longer because it's still fairly hot to knead. The marzipan has cooled down a whole lot now, and it's cool enough to knead. Now at this point, it is still warm, but it makes this whole kneading process a whole lot easier. So I'm just going to knead this just till it forms a nice little dough. Now at this point, if you find that this dough is too sticky, you can fix it. Add a little icing sugar at a time till it reaches the desired consistency. Like you can see, the dough is forming shape and holding shape fairly well. There's nothing left on my hands. If the dough is too dry, it can still be saved. Add a tiny bit of rose water and knead that into the dough. But if you use the cold water test that I just showed you, you'll find that there's very little need for fixing. And even if you have to do a little bit of a fix-up job, you won't need to add too much of either the rose water or the icing sugar for that matter. Just getting every last bit of marzipan off that spoon, and I'm going to continue kneading this. It helps to work with smaller portions like this. So this is what I choose to do. It just makes it a whole lot easier. The recipe will work for you if you follow it to a T, including the ratio of ingredients, the amount of the ingredients, and the other tips and tricks that I mentioned. If you make substitutions, the recipe will still probably work, but it's going to be very hard for me to know how it's going to turn out. I can't guarantee that it will be 100%, it will work, or it will taste like it's supposed to. So just bear that in mind when you're looking to make substitutions. This is a method that works for me. I've never really had the need to try out anything too different, so I just stick to what works well for me. And look at this, guys. We've got ourselves a beautiful batch of marzipan. I'm excited. At this stage, once you've kneaded and it's all nice and smooth, you can use it in any recipe that calls for marzipan. You can use this marzipan to cover a fruit cake if that's what you'd like to do this Christmas, or you can use this for Christmas sweets to shape them into little fruit or just mold them out into shapes. If you don't have the molds and you don't have the time to sit and mold them into little shapes, just roll it out into one disc and cut them into little squares. Use a cookie cutter, cut them into shapes. Get creative. You'll still end up with a treat that is really, really tasty. Of course, if you're using cookie cutters, you might want to use little ones, not really big ones, because that can be quite sweet to deal with. Okay, now we've got a few portions of marzipan ready. At this point, the marzipan is still slightly warm to the touch, and we want it like that right now. It'll just help this process get a whole lot easier. Since I'm going to continue with making my marzipan for Christmas, at this stage, I'm going to add in the coloring. Now, like I said, gel color doesn't really require too much color, as well as one thing to note is that your colors will continue to deepen, continue to get darker as the marzipan sits. So start out with just a little. I'm going to start with just one little drop. Another thing to note is you might want to start off with your lighter colors so that even if your hands get stained with the lighter colors, it won't really affect the darker colors too much. If you start off with a dark color, you run the risk of it running onto your lighter colors. My pink seems to be... Okay, and now I'm just going to knead these colors in. I'm going to continue with this process and I'll get back to you once all the colors have been kneaded. And after a little bit of kneading, here's what I've got. I've got a beautiful soft pink, I've got my avocado green, and I've got my peach. Okay, now at this point, I'm going to use my molds. What I've got over here is just a little silicone mat. This is what I use for my baking as well. Just something to catch the marzipan once it's molded and formed. You can use a large plate, a tray, or if you don't have one large enough, just use some baking paper and that'll do the job. Again, I'm going to start with the lightest color first. I'm going to start off with my pink. I'm just going to give this one last knead so that it is more pliable. It's just like Play-Doh, but a lot tastier. There we go. That's a lot softer now. All you're doing is breaking a little piece off and roll it into a ball. You need to ensure that there are no cracks in it. I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit. Yep. You need to ensure that there are no cracks on the outside. That is what will ensure a nice, neat looking piece once it comes out of the mold. Pick a mold of your choice. I'll probably pick a flower. Oh, I don't know. This one. And you're going to make sure that that little cavity is full. If there's any extra, just take it off. Make sure that the back is nice and flat. It's a lot neater that way. And you can continue forming the rest of your shapes. Now, let your imagination run wild. You can either use a single color to a piece like I've done here, or you can mix it up. So let's say I'm going to take a little bit of that orange. I usually work with one color at a time because I don't like the colors bleeding into each other. But just for the purpose of demonstration. Okay. We're going to put a little bit of that peach on the top. I need a little bit more. And a little bit of that green down the bottom. Again, you need to make sure that that's nice and flat. Now, once that's done, there's no waiting really required. Flip it over, give it a little bit of a tap, and they pop out. At this point, the marzipan's still a little on the softer side, so set them aside on a plate and let them set at room temperature on a countertop, away from moisture, away from heat, for an hour, a couple of hours, and you'll notice that they set a little stiffer than they are right now. Okay, so we'll just leave that aside. Now you don't need to mold and demold just a couple of pieces like this. What I like to do is go around, fill up all the little pieces. Now another question that pops up fairly often is whether I grease these molds. Like you can see today, I haven't greased the molds. They're just a nice clean set. And there's enough of oils in the nuts to help them release without any effort. Like you can see, as I'm forming them, sometimes they just stick onto my finger and pop right back out without any trouble at all. So in this manner, I'm just going to go around the mold till I'm done with this color. So I'm done with molding all of my pink and I'm ready to just get them off the mold. So all that you need to do is flip it over, and using the back or a handle of a spoon, just give it a couple of good whacks. And just like that, the marzipan pops out. And like you can see, you've got a beautiful finish on the sweets. So I'm going to continue forming the rest of the colors and I'll see you back after. And there you go guys, that's the yield I got from this recipe. I'm pretty stoked with how this has turned out. I've made a fair number of batches of marzipan in my time, and after tasting this, I can tell you this much. This eggless variety is just as good as my previous version, the one with the egg. I mean, with a gorgeous assortment of a platter that comes together for about 10 to 12 minutes of cooking time, you really can't ask for much more. It does take a little while to mold, but then again, if you've got a few extra pairs of hands to help you out, that makes very light work out of it. I'm so happy with how these have turned out, and I hope you enjoy the recipe too. So guys, that was my version of an eggless or a vegan marzipan. I hope you enjoyed today's recipe. If you did, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with family and friends that you think might enjoy it too. If you're new here and you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to my channel. Once you do that, click on that little bell icon so that you get notified every time a new video gets uploaded. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll see you really soon with another delicious recipe. So till then, take care. Bye.